Cain and Abel. So Cain was the firstborn and Abel the secondborn. And the word says that Cain was a tiller of the ground and Abel was a shepherd and he looked after the flock. So that could mean the physical, tilling the ground, planting seeds, and in Abel's case, looking after the herd. But what does that mean in the spirit? Or does it only mean that they were shepherds and tilling the ground? Well, we know what the ground is and what it means to till the ground. It means to work in the soul, either your own or other people's, to get to the spirit. So this is what Cain did. He worked in the soul. So he was probably a teacher, and whereas Abel was somebody that looked after his neighbors, that looked after the herd, like Jesus is a shepherd. So his love for his flock was probably more than the teachers. And later on we hear in the word through Paul that he says that Abel's offering was done in faith, whereas Cain's was more done grudgingly. So there's a big difference between the offer of Cain and the offer of Abel. Cain gets upset about this. His countenance falls and God comes to him and he says, why has your countenance fallen? If you do good, you will be accepted. But if you don't do good, sin is at the door. And I'm telling you, you need to rule over sin. So what does that mean? How do we rule over sin? Well, sin at the door is a different thought process. And it's a thought process of, first of all, depression. Then it becomes anger. And that leads to murder. So if we do not deal with those thoughts to start off with, we do not rule over the enemy. In fact, sin or the enemy will rule over us. We have to deal with those thoughts. Later on in the New Testament, we learn that we take all thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ. That is how we rule over sin, by not allowing those sinful thoughts to resonate within our mind. Jesus put it this way. He said, if we look at a woman in lust, we have already sinned. What does that mean? That means if we look at a woman and we entertain those thoughts of lust, and whatever they are, we have already sinned. Jesus makes it clear that through the wrong thought process, we sin. And we don't rule over the enemy. But if we stop those thoughts in their tracks, if we take those thoughts captive, we rule over the enemy. We rule over sin. So Cain's sin started by allowing the wrong thoughts. He did not rule over those thoughts and thought godly thoughts that God gave them. Instead, he thought the enemy's thoughts, and that eventually led to his fall. So we see that Cain fails in ruling over the enemy. In fact, he allows sin to enter, and he rises up and he kills his brother. Now God, knowing this, comes to him and he says, where's your brother? And he says, am I my brother's keeper? But God is doing this to show him something, because obviously God already knew that he killed his brother. But he says, the blood of your brother screams at me from the ground. So what does that mean? How can the blood of his brother scream from the ground? Remember what the ground is. That ground is the man, Cain's soul. And what happened is when Adam and Eve started partaking of the flesh, they awakened a conscience. And it was a painful conscience. That's why they had that knowledge that they have no righteousness of their own. And this is why God said to Cain that the blood of his brother is screaming at him from the ground. In other words, Cain's conscience was so wounded by him killing his brother, he couldn't hide it from God. And his conscience was not pure. And God ended up cursing him even further. God said that even that little bit that the ground would have blessed him with, that his soul would have blessed him with, that little bit of word and knowledge and spirit of God, God's going to take even that away. So Cain has gone from being a son of God with a remnant of the Spirit of God to being a Genesis 1 person with no Spirit of God. He had no Spirit because God cursed that ground completely. We read in Malachi, which is the last book of the New Testament, that God in fact left a remnant of His Spirit within Adam and Eve because He wanted holy children. So that remnant of the Spirit He withdrew from the man Cain. Cain was obviously very upset and he said, "This is the worst punishment that I could have, and if anybody sees me, they'll kill me." And God says, you'll mark him, and whoever kills Cain, it will be visited back on them sevenfold. But the key that we need to see here is that the man Cain became like the Genesis 1 people, having a soul and having a body, flesh, but having no Spirit of God. He went in and he got married and he built a city, and that's just further proof that there were other people, flesh people, people who did not have of the Spirit of God.